Hello, my quilting friends! Leah Day here with a new sit-down quilting Sunday. This week I pulled out this little UFO quilt. It was actually just a test quilt that I was working on many years ago, and pulled it out because I think it's going to be a great example of dense quilting. And tackling really dense, intense quilting on your long arm can be a little tricky. So let's get on the machine. I'll give you some tips for how I'm managing this cool quilt. So I'm stitching within these sun rays, and it's just this little bouncy echo design. It's real fine. So I'm bouncing from one line over to the other with just a little gentle arch shape. And I'm trying to keep this roughly consistent so the lines are evenly spaced, but as you can see, sometimes they get a little closer together and sometimes they get a little further apart. And that's okay. You know, it's one of those things that this is stitched by a human being. So it's going to have nuances like that. It's not going to be 100% perfect, and it's not going to be 100% consistent. But I do want the quilting to be very dense, very intense. The only design going on here is the thread on the quilt surface. This is a whole cloth. So, and this particular style is really intense. I've done a lot of thread painting here to really build up the thread on the surface. And so speaking of thread painting, that's what I'm basically going to go into now. I want these lines to really stand up boldly on the quilt surface. So I'm stitching back and forth along them. And that's a cool thing is that let's say I stitched off in any area badly, I could always quilt over it a few times and that would hide that mistake. Now this is something that you can use to hide mistakes quite a lot. Now the downside is that once you do something like this in an area of your quilt to hide a mistake, then you kind of need to do it consistently everywhere. And as you can see, this takes a lot of time. It's part of the reason why this is an unfinished project for me, because I just never really had the desire to do this much stitching on this little piece. But pulling it back out again has been really fun because I've been able to explore all these fun designs again. So you've seen me stitch those back and forth arch shapes. I'm going to just do a little bit of travel stitching on some of these lines, and I'll quilt down into this area and figure out what we're going to fill it with. Let's see here. I think the easiest way to get over there is just to travel stitch over, and then I'm going to work my way down along that line into that space. So another thing about this quilt is it was a test piece, meaning that I was just using it to test designs and motifs. And so there's a lot of things going on here. It's pretty chaotic. And playing with it, I've been trying to figure out ways of pulling it back together again so it makes a little bit more sense. So I realized I actually need to do a little bit more travel stitching down into this area because that's really where the design starts. And that's really where I want to focus my attention. And this is one of those things I oftentimes get distracted with little areas like this. So it's like, oh, I'm right here. I might as well go on ahead and fix this spot, meaning throw more thread at it and just do a little bit more stitching over those lines so that way they make a little bit more sense. They're a little bit more consistent with the rest of the design and they look better. You know, sometimes I think when I was stitching this, initially I was in a big hurry, and so I really wasn't taking the amount of time that I could have to really stitch it right. So I'm going to quilt down into this area. Now, this is one of those things that's really nice to stitch over dark fabric with light thread. I know that seems really scary, but this is one of those things that can just really rocket your quilting ability really up a notch because you can really see what you're doing. You can see your thread. You can see every single mistake, every single stitch off. And then that means that you can really improve. You're not quilting in the dark so that you can see every little bit of it and make massive improvements in a very short space of time. So that's why I really enjoy this and why it's kind of become my style. You know, initially it was just simply so that you could see what I was doing on video, and then now it's just become what I like to do. One of those weird things. Okay, here we go. Now I'm going to stitch down into this bottom area. I've been thinking about what design I want to try. I want to do something very different. This quilt has a lot of different things going on with it, and I think what I want to do is some very tiny feathers. So basically I'm just going to get started with a teardrop shape in that area. Pull back down to the center. And then now I'm going to just start branching off with more feathers. So these are travel back feathers, so I'm traveling back along the back side of the feather, branching up and around. It's the way I like to form feathers. It feels very natural to me. But, you know, any type of feather, you know, everybody kind of quilts those differently. But in this tiny, tiny space, I really want them to remain small and consistent, and I have good control over the size and shape. So I'm just going to form these shapes all the way up this area. And I almost feel like I'm holding my breath because it's so tiny. This little space is so small. And while the scale of the quilting is pretty similar to what I've been doing on my table runner, you know, I have these clear lines that I, you know, just cannot stitch out of that area. I want to make sure that I don't make a mistake. The table runner has felt much simpler and easier because, you know, it's been very freeform, and even if I, you know, stitched wildly off into some weird direction, I could still probably make it work. That's looking good. I like that. I like that effect. Now I'm going to stitch feathers in the opposite direction, just the exact same way. Travel back, branch out with that curve shape, stitch back to the line, branch out again. Notice that I slow down as I'm doing that travel stitching. Well, pretty much I'm kind of stitching generally at a very slow rate through this area. And this is just speed control. It's just having good control over your foot pedal, being able to find that slowest speed. And I'll admit, this has been a struggle for me on the long arm. It's been harder to find this slow speed on the long arm in comparison to my home machines, but it's there. You just got to find it. You know, the more patient you are, the more willing you are to sit down at the machine and throw some thread at it, you know, just do some stitching, the more comfortable you're going to get. And the more comfortable you get, the more confident you'll feel, and then you'll feel even better about your quilting and be able to tackle projects like this. So that's it for this video. I really hope that you enjoyed seeing me quilt in this little whole cloth quilt. It's certainly been good for me to pull out this UFO and get some stitching on it. I call it throwing some thread at it, so that way I can see some progress on this project. If you enjoyed this video, please share it with your friends and subscribe to my channel on YouTube. It really helps me out a lot, and it lets me know that you're appreciating this new series. Now, if you're interested in learning more about Grace Qnique, this is the Grace Qnique 14 Plus machine, you can learn more at graceframes.com. Until next time, let's go quilt.